So we're doing a documentary of Stand to Reason because this is our 30th year.
You said 1993 when you guys went.
1993 is when we started, yeah. It's hard to imagine.
We both were born in 93.
Yeah, no. You were born in 93? So when you hear me talking about the gospel and Pilate and Jesus and Barabbas, that's your cue to come in behind me. Well, it is what it is. My ears are sticking out. I have to live with it.
The night before we lost my grandpa, I had the opportunity to share the gospel with him. And my grandpa was hard to the gospel his whole life. Okay?
Yeah, he's not talking about
anything to do with Christianity.
his last illustration yet. You got a few minutes.
What's the last illustration?
The airplane, the fighter pilot.
He used to fly CF-18s in the Royal Canadian Air Force. Yes, Canada has an Air Force, okay?
If I could just lay this foundation before I move into the specifics of what I have to share with you today. I think that Christians need a major dose of confidence. And that's part of, as I look back, what a big part of my life is about, giving Christians confidence. So there's a crying need not only to make the stand, but to be able to teach other people how to make a stand.
Greg has had a huge impact on how I do apologetics.
He has been faithful in perfecting the gifts that he has.
Greg, there are very few people I would put in my upper tier of influencers who have shaped my life. You are in that category.
What he has that we can all learn from is this sense of, I'm going to take what God has given me and I'm just going to move forward step by step with this and just see what God does with it.
I didn't really want to do this. I didn't really want to start an enterprise like this.
If you can't give a why to your faith, you will never be able to give a why not to your doubts. Now, before we finish, I want you to hear from the founder and president of Stand to Reason, my boss, Greg Koukl.
In the early 90s, I saw something that was going on in culture with regards to Christianity. I was watching Christians left and right fall for nonsense. And the Christians that were speaking out, in other words, the Christians that weren't being silent, were shrill and shallow. When I saw the kinds of things that Christianity could give to the culture and the ways that thoughtful Christians have defended Christianity in the past, and then I saw what was being done, I thought, maybe here's some place I can make a contribution.
This used to be an old bowling alley, and when I came in, I was one of the first people to preach from that stage, having just got back from Eastern Europe in 1976. And I told them about my experiences. It was all roughed out, mob of Jesus people, thrilled to be together, loving the Lord, making a difference. And after we started Stand to Reason in 1993, I think for the first year we kept the office that I had in the beginning, but we needed a place to expand into, so they gave us a room back here. I have not been in this room for decades. This is it right here. All right. Feels like an Egyptian tomb. There it is. Wow. This was it. The first Stand to Reason office. Didn't have all this nice wood on the ceiling. We did have wainscoting there. I think it was painted burgundy, like Stand to Reason color, and then we had wallpaper.
This is where you and Melinda worked?
Melinda and I were the staff people who worked in this room as paid Stand to Reason staff at the time, and then we had a lot of volunteers that would come in here and do their different tasks. I've never had any future in mind for Stand to Reason. My focus has always been, let's do what we can with what we got, what I call now blooming where you're planted, and let's see what God does. I honestly feel that I didn't make this happen. I was just there when it happened.
I want to train others. Stand to Reason will be there to train others to stand up and do the same thing, doing what we can to help people move a little bit further ahead. It's my desire to raise up a whole army of clear-thinking Christians. And the significance of being tied into history is this word is testable. So here we got God's salvation power working out in history. It's actually possible to know if 2,000 years ago there was a resurrection from the dead that changed the face of the globe.
I actually spent the first 5 years of my life on a farm in northern Wisconsin. It was the boyhood I wish more boys would be able to have nowadays, and those days are largely gone. And then in 1955, on Good Friday, we burned out. The whole house burned down, we barely got out, so my dad had to move back to Chicago. And filed bankruptcy, had another kid at 26 years old, 5 kids, a family to support. It was a hard go for him.
My dad was a very hard worker. He was nurturing, caring, and loving, but at the same time, he was a strong disciplinarian. And one of the things that he had an uncanny ability to parse an argument. And I think out of all the siblings, Greg probably acquired that skill the most.
It really set a foundation for me, I think, of self-reliance and productivity and work ethic, and I got this from my dad. He was a hard worker, and he had to be in order to take care of this family under the circumstances that he faced.
I noticed this, though, early on with Greg, that he was exhibiting qualities of leadership and organization and excellence. And he was an avid fisherman. As many of you know, today he's still an avid fisherman. He was always pursuing the best way to catch fish. What was the best lures to use? What was the best tackle to use? What was the best fishing rods to use? And he would research the quality of the rod itself, and he would compare rods with other types of rods. And he would research what is the best time in the day to go fishing. He would research what was the best depth of the water to catch the fish. And he would research what's the best temperature of the water. And on and on and on. In fact, he did that so much, we began to call him and tease him by calling him Ted Trueblood. He was an outdoorsman and a writer for Field and Stream magazine in the 50s and the 60s.
So in the mid-'60s, I was a senior in high school, or I just graduated, and I was confronted about my own prior religious beliefs, which were rather shallow, and I was asked, do you really believe that? As I thought about it, I'd never been asked that before. I realized I didn't really believe it. And so that's when I left Christianity, or at least what I understood to be Christianity, behind me. Now, my younger brother, Mark, he's 2 years my junior, had become a Christian during the Jesus movement, and I thought, well, that's good for him. He needed that, but I was too smart for that. I was the only person to graduate from college, and I thought, I don't need that kind of thing. I've got a better way.
One evening, we were sitting at the kitchen table, and of course, the conversation turned to Christianity. And I said, Greg, I have shared with you everything that I know. And you've heard everything you need to know to make a decision for Christ.
And I said, Mark, you don't need to tell me anything more about Jesus. I've already decided I want to become a Christian.
He said, I already have. Well, that floored me.
Now, it took me about 15 minutes to peel him off the ceiling. Then I prayed a simple prayer.
And so at that table, in our little apartment in West Los Angeles, we bowed our heads in prayer, and he prayed to give his life to Christ.
And that's when I started following Jesus. One of the most significant things that ever happened to me in my Christian life happened to me in a short span of about 30 minutes before I was a Christian, with a chance encounter with a young lady who, after that encounter, I never saw again in my life. Her name was Adrienne Thatcher. I was riding a bus coming from Santa Monica Beach, where I'd been body surfing. I was kind of a long-haired hippie type guy. She was reading a Bible, But she was cute, and so I leaned over the bus seat, and began to talk with her, figuring maybe I'd get lucky. Turns out she wasn't interested in me, except for to tell me about Jesus. And we got off at the same stop, so hope springs eternal. I walked her to her apartment. She said goodbye, closed the door, and I never saw her again. But what I remember about what Adrienne Thatcher said was that there was a Bible study that she went to in Westwood Village at this place that sounded to me like a lighthouse or something like that. And as it turned out, after I became a Christian, I remembered that she had said that. And so I went searching for the place, and I found it. It was called the Jesus Christ Light and Power House, and it was actually a Christian community right there on the edge of the UCLA campus.
Sweet. Yeah, we're ready to start when you're ready to go.
My name is Craig Englert, and I've been a friend of Greg Koukl for about now close to 50 years.
Craig Englert was a surfer guy from Hawaii. He actually was from the mainland somewhere, but went to Hawaii to surf, and that's where he became a Christian. And began to be used by God in the Jesus movement there in the islands, and then came back to the mainland and became part of the Light and Power House faculty.
I will never forget the first time I met Greg. Greg was playing tennis this one particular afternoon, and he was just getting back from tennis, and he had a backpack with his tennis racket. And so as I was leaving the school, Greg asked me this question. He says, "Where are you going right now?" And I said, "Well, I'm going out to do this ministry to people who are standing in line at this premiere of this movie called The Exorcist."
What was great about Craig is that, first of all, he really loved me. He wasn't harsh. He wasn't mean. He was good. And this was different from what I'd experienced growing up with my own dad. Not only that, is he included me wherever he went.
And so I asked him to join with me, and he said, sure. And he just dropped off his bag, and Greg and I, together, we went around that circle passing out these gospel tracts, and that's how we met, and that's when we got to be kind of one mind in terms of our zeal for evangelism.
We spent 2 summers working in Waikiki, 10 weeks long, on summer outreach projects. So these were all things that he involved me with, and he was there with me. It was a great example of one-on-one, intentional, relational discipleship. And I never forgot the lesson. And the lesson wasn't the particular things he taught me. The lesson was him being with me and taking me with him. And that made all the difference. But what was so important to me as I look back now is what I call the Adrienne Thatcher effect. That Adrienne was being faithful in a small circumstance that made all the difference in my life. Because I'm pretty convinced that I would not be sitting here now, after 30 years would stand to reason, if Adrienne had not been faithful in that moment on that bus ride, even though she never saw me again in her life.
Alan Kasaka. Alan Kasaka, worship leader 30 years ago, still here, faithful brother, magnificent brother, and magnificent worship leader too. Glad to see he's still around. Probably a couple of more, but for the most part it's a whole new crowd, as it should be.
In the spring of 1993, I was a staff member at Hope Chapel at Hermosa Beach, and every year they had a group that went to Madras, India, where they had a partnership with Bobby Gupta, who is the head of the Hindustan Bible Institute there.
And I want to say that whenever God calls us to the task of carrying out His mission, He calls us to obedience.
Towards the end of that time, I just had this sense things were changing. And there was Bobby Gupta, and he said, you know, you ought to start your own organization and focus your capabilities more so that you do what you're best at.
So Bobby Gupta asked Greg and I to go to breakfast, and here is Bobby saying, Greg Koukl, you have a gift, and we need what you have. we need to be equipped. We need to be able to stand tall and firm and not to be silent. We need to be able to not be, shallow in our thinking, but to go deeper.
When he said that, I thought, no, that's too much work. I just brushed it off. Got back to the States, and about 2 or 3 weeks later, Bobby came to the States and we had breakfast together. And at that breakfast, he leaned on me pretty hard. He said, this you need to do. And so I thought to myself, all right, I'll take another step. God was working sovereignly to bring all the things together that brought me to a point of the launch of Stand to Reason, May 1st, 1993.
So there's a crying need here, not only to make the stand, but also to be able to teach other people how to make a stand. This is what's behind the idea of Stand to Reason.
One of the things that came up at that meeting, that private meeting at my home, was it sounds like, Greg, you just want to be a speaker and have a secretary, Melinda Penner in this case. That's not big enough, is basically what they communicated to me. Being a Lone Ranger apologist wasn't big enough. I didn't want it to be about me. Afterwards, when I began thinking about this, I realized that's true. This has got to be bigger than me. It can't just be a personality thing. And that's when I started to form this broader idea of a project that can train Christians to think more carefully about their convictions and then, in the culture, defend classical Christianity and classical Christian values.
Everybody in the world knows something's wrong with the world. It doesn't matter when you lived or where you lived, we're all aware of the problem. What's the problem? Things are not the way they're supposed to be.
I wanted to be a project that was bigger than me. It became much bigger than I ever imagined it would ever be. I never had any idea it would go this far. God did, though.
Greg has had an enormous impact on my Christian walk. Just the way that he uses these terms, this winsome and attractive method for engaging people about the things of Christ, about taking things that are complex and or kind of fiery out in the culture and breaking them down and creating a two-way dialogue with people who may and often do disagree with us, but respecting the person on the other side of the question or the argument. He has this winsome, attractive demeanor about him that I've tried to model in my own life.
One of the interesting things that I noted about Greg from the very beginning when I met him, he had a presence about him of earnestness, of a sincerity, and an unwillingness to take a simplistic answer to a hard question. So, I can remember him asking me some questions, and I gave him a quick reply. And he would push back and say, well, I don't think that works. Here's why.
JP has been a magnificent influence in my life. Sometimes I've told him I don't know where I end and he begins, or maybe he ends and I begin. My ideas are so meshed with many of his. He has helped me form my thinking as a thoughtful Christian. He's helped me to be able to present Christianity worth thinking about, which is a handle kind of for Stand to Reason, and navigate through very difficult circumstances philosophically. I'm greatly indebted to J.P. Moreland in my life.
And I realized, oh boy, this is a gentleman that really likes to think, and he is doggedly persistent in finding credible answers to the questions that he has and that other people ask him. So it was his integrity, it was the sense of commitment to Christ that I sensed in his life that has proven true, and it was his intellectual curiosity and willingness to face the tough questions that told me that this brother's going to go places.
Greg and Melinda invited me to come out to speak at Hope Chapel, where in those days Stand to Reason had a series called the Masters Series. Remember, I spoke on the question, my first lecture I ever gave for them was on whether miracles are possible. They wouldn't put me up at a hotel. I'd stay with Greg. This is before he was married. And so there were just things like he had homemade beef jerky. I just thought, I didn't know anyone who made homemade beef jerky. And he had I think it was like a big kind of cylinder with different levels. And he said, this one has pepper, this one has barbecue. I think this guy's like a real connoisseur of beef jerky. So I thought that was strange. It was great beef. I will tell you, it was great beef jerky. That's something that I think maybe gets lost. Maybe it doesn't get lost. I think he communicates really well over the radio and in front of audiences, but he's a really kind person. He really cares about how he affects people. The other thing is how careful he is about the ministry, about Stand to Reason, how he wants to do everything right. He is aware of the stumbles that have occurred at other ministries, and so he holds himself accountable. He has a board that he's accountable to. I think that's all speaks of his character. I don't know what it says about beef jerky, but
One day I'm riding in my car and I turn on the radio on a Saturday afternoon, and you got to understand, this is in the middle of the whole seeker-friendly church growth movement where everything now has been dumbed down, and I'm beginning to despair that there could be anything of thoughtful content out there in the Christian community. And lo and behold, here's this guy on the radio talking about deep stuff, both theologically and ethically, and he's unbelievably skilled at linking together both the theology we hold as Christians and how it applies to our ethic. And I was blown away. I'd never heard anybody speak so clearly, but not only speak in an intelligent way, but make it understandable to a layperson. I thought, this guy not only knows how to be smart, he knows how to translate.
So I got to know Greg really early on in my writing and speaking. And I remember this was at an event that we were at together, and I was really honored to meet him. And we passed earlier in the day and just walking by each other, and he said, hey, I'd love to talk to you a little bit later. Could we meet up and just have a conversation? And I said, sure, yeah, of course. And so we arranged to meet up, and I walked away terrified. Absolutely terrified, because I was a new writer and speaker, and I thought I had done something horribly wrong. And later that afternoon, we met up, and it could not have been any different. I mean, Greg basically was giving me so much positive feedback about what he had seen in my writing and in my speaking, and just wanted to be this encourager to me. And he said, if there's anything that I can do to help you, let me know.
All right, friends, Greg Koukl here on Stand to Reason. I'm really looking forward to this hour because my guest is my dear colleague and author of 3 books that you probably are familiar with. Of course, I'm talking about Natasha Crane. And Natasha, I think you're kind of like the patron saint of Christian moms. What do you think?
I don't know about that, but hopefully I've helped to equip some of them.
Well, you really come to the rescue of families with this wonderful work that you've done. And
he's not just an apologist. I see him as the pastor apologist. And I don't think that he would see himself that way. But what I mean is that he has these pastoral qualities in what he's doing as an apologist. You really can sense that he deeply cares. And you see that he just is almost a mentor to the person he's talking with in every single case. I don't think he realizes the degree to which that's really true.
As I look back on the last 30 years, this idea of training Christians, which is the core of the mission of Stand to Reason, has always been a key part of my own philosophy of ministry. Discipleship.
Leslie and I were dating when I first met Greg. So the year that STR was founded, I met him at his New Year's Eve party. At the kickoff meeting, we had a date hike set up, and she asked me if we could go to this before we went out to the mountains.
Well, we started a website, and the key thing about websites at that time was very new. Few of them really lacked a lot of content, but Stand to Reason had this vast quantity of Greg's commentaries. And so we translated those into HTML and put them up. And so it was very basic in terms of look and appearance, but the breadth and the depth of the content was significant. So Stand to Reason started out right away as a very significant resource to people.
So you were there from the beginning?
Yes, definitely from the beginning. I mean, I remember just basically coding HTML pages around his words and putting in paragraph marks, and then we used our coding skills to automate that process so we could take them in and spit out web pages without doing it all by hand, because Greg was creating so much material that keeping up with it was hard.
When it was time to start Stand to Reason, I talked to Melinda, who was there at those initial meetings, and asked her, will you help me do this? Because I needed help. And she said, absolutely. She was on board. It turned out Melinda Penner became the central nervous system of Stand to Reason for, 25 years.
First question, what does Jesus mean by believe in John 6:35, 40, and 47?
John 6:30. I got to go there.
It's in the New Testament. You tweeted, I believe in science, not religion, is like saying, I believe in Cuisinart, not morality.
Right.
The two are not mutually exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So one person responded that science and religion are the exact opposite. So explain your point.
Well, no, they would have to explain their point.
Yeah, but they're on Twitter, and so I can't have them explain their point.
I know,
so
but
you explain to this person.
Right, but the point I'm making is a person who says that I believe in science and not religion is presuming that they're mutually exclusive.
So it's not science and Christianity that are in conflict, it's materialism.
It's materialism. It's not science as a methodology of determining what actually takes place in
itself.
Right.
It's the philosophy that drives modern science.
Exactly right.
Which is a recent development.
Then a few years later, 1998, Frank Beckwith and I published Relativism, Feet Firmly Planted in Midair, and that gave visibility to Stand to Reason a little bit more. And then not too long after that, a few years later, Lee Strobel had his TV show that he asked me to be a part of. And the episode that is most memorable is the one I did with Deepak Chopra. And you can still get this on YouTube.
And you really believe that Christ's version of the truth is the only version of the truth?
I think Jesus was right.
Absolute.
I think if the Gospels are accurate, and I have every reason to believe that they are in their broad, salient details. And here's a man who claimed to be God, who claimed to be the only way of salvation, who clearly claimed to be the way of forgiveness of sin, and then controlled the forces of nature, raised the dead, healed the sick, cast out demons, predicted his own death and resurrection, and then raised himself from the dead. And eyewitnesses saw this. Now, if that really happened, and that's really the question here, then Jesus has tremendous credibility in my book. And frankly, I'm going to stick with Jesus Christ instead of with Deepak Chopra on this issue.
Yeah, but what if I showed you similar accounts in the East about other people?
Then I'd have to see whether the justification, if you are just as critical of the historical reliability of those documents as you are of the gospel accounts, and to see if those documents have as well attested evidence for their historical reliability as the gospel accounts. So far, I haven't seen that. Lee was so happy with the way the interview was going, he went a full hour, basically, devoted his entire show just to this conversation.
Unless we are willing to embrace our own uncertainty and take that leap of faith and say, I'll trust the unknown because of what I've experienced. But, my faith doesn't come from a book.
Okay.
Not even mine.
Well, the idea of truth is diametrically opposed to taking a leap of faith. Listen, Lee, if you can't know what the truth is on things in general, you will not survive 24 hours. Everybody who gets in a car, everybody who takes medicine, everybody who walks out the door has to have some way of assessing what the truth is. This was also very pivotal for us. Lee was so excited about that show that he wrote the introduction to Tactics, which came in 2009, and then that, of course, began to get a footing, and that book by Zondervan, who had published it, brought a lot more attention to Stand to Reason. So all these little milestones all along the way, and there were more of them too, were things that God used to give more visibility to Stand to Reason, to give people more instruction, more discipleship. Now at arm's length, not just close by, face to face, but now through these different mediums.
Okay, recording. I can't say what I really think about it, Barry.
Because what if something happens to you and they pick the next videographer who doesn't have the relationship that you and I have, and he doesn't edit out all the mean, rotten things that I'm saying about Greg.
You know this guy named Jay Warner?
Exactly. This guy's a cancer. Get him out of your life. My name is Jay Warner Wallace. Actually, my name is Jim Wallace, but Greg Koukl forced me to change my name. And I am a cold case detective in Los Angeles. In the last 10 years or so, I've had a chance to work with Greg. Really just getting a chance to do what Greg does so well and learn from him and talk to audiences about what is true about God.
Yeah, but see, here's the problem. We say we are this, when in fact we're more like this. We kind of like Jesus. We admire him. Or maybe it's even worse. Maybe we're like, you know what? Let's try to change Jesus so he fits us. Maybe we'll just cut out some of the things he's said. No. I'm not a modifier, a redactor. I'm not an admirer. I'm a Jesus follower. Here's what it means. It means we have to be ready to answer the tough questions and stand tall in the trauma. It's coming.
When I first started thinking about Christianity, I was not a believer. I was 35 years old, and I was really not thinking, I really was thinking that Christianity wasn't true for a couple of reasons. And one of those was just that I never met any Christians that really seemed to be able to defend what they believed. And in that first year of just looking at the evidence for Christianity, I was going back and forth to work. I was living maybe about an hour and a half from work, so I had a lot of time in the car. And I was listening to this guy named Greg Koukl on the radio, and I had, I had really a much lifted view of Christians because of Greg. Had never met him, just was not a believer yet, just was listening to see, well, okay, so this is a guy who seemed different to me compared to the other Christians I was meeting because he actually was thinking about why this might be true. Fast forward another, 5-6 years, and I'm serving as a youth pastor. I hired this guy named Koukl, who happened to be working at Stand to Reason. And we were at a fundraiser for Brett. And this guy taps me on the shoulder, and it's Greg Koukl. Now, of course, I was aware of Greg's work. I've been listening to him for years. But I never really thought I'd ever meet the guy. I thought, Brett's probably as close as I'm going to get to anybody at Stand to Reason. And really, from the time I met Greg, we had a friendship. And it just blossomed from there. So I got lucky to meet Greg through Brett. They do say that you should never Google whoever it is you think is a hero. If you watch some movie and there's some star on the movie, don't Google that person because you're going to find out all kinds of stuff you don't want to know. And I didn't have that experience, of course, with Greg. I mean, he was so gracious and attentive. He would just listen. He was probably using his tactics on me. I just didn't know it at the time. When I met Greg, what I loved about him was his sense of calm. He's not rattled by any particular question. He's not, and that calm I interpret as confidence. He has this kind of reserved calmness. Even on the radio, when he's dealing with people, he'll let them empty out what they're going to say, and then he calmly responds. And that's, I think, one of the things that drew me to Greg's work.
I actually pranked Greg Koukl once. He's not a real prankster. I am. There was one time we were at the office, and I had driven up, parked my car right by his car, and I had these kind of fake parking violation tickets that I kept in my car. And so I wrote one out to Greg, I put it on his car, went in, had our staff meeting. He leaves staff meeting, he gets in his car and drives away, and I'm still at the office, and I hear the phone ring. Melinda answers it, and I can hear her saying, what? What happened? Oh my gosh. And there's this concern. He didn't think it was an actual parking violation. At first he did, but then when he started reading it, it's got a bunch of humor on it. But he thought maybe someone in the complex was ticked at him for parking there, and so he was all upset about it. And that was the last prank I did with Koukl. One thing that I realized quickly when I joined the staff at STR and I would get invited to speak is that Stand to Reason has a great reputation. And it's almost like Greg and STR were lending that to me and kind of giving me an endorsement and saying, hey, we believe in this guy, and this guy is, he's credible. And it's kind of like, you've got these different generations. And Greg, certainly a much older generation. But Greg, a generation of Koukls, younger guys stood on their shoulders, built on their work. The training that I received, the mentoring that I received, all helped me in my development as not only a professional, but as someone who is a leader in the church and trying to equip the church for, the two commissions, the Cultural Commission and the Great Commission.
One great strength of Stand to Reason over the decades has been their ability to just do mere apologetics. If you visit the international headquarters of Stand to Reason, it's in an industrial center, and it's even in the back cubicle of an industrial center. And I know people come in from around the world wanting to visit the international headquarters. Not much going on there. Although there are a lot of wonderful ideas and wonderful people working there, but that's just not their focus. So, Greg, some of that hair's gotten grayer, and you do forget a name now and then, but I gotta tell you, you still have a long and fruitful future in doing the Lord's work through apologetics and discipleship. You've been a master at it. The Lord has blessed you, and I know you've had some difficulties and some struggles along the way, as all of us have, but you've overcome them, and you've clung to the Lord the whole way.
Well, ever since 2008, when we started CIA, I love being with Greg at least once a year. Normally we run into one another on other occasions, and we're always on one another's podcasts. We kind of have the same mission. We want to reach out to people who are at least open to the gospel and provide them with evidence that Christianity is true, but we want to do it in a way that will not be off-putting. And so Greg has been sort of a mentor to me in doing that, because his tactics and his ability to interact with people and ask the right questions, I think, is second to none.
As time has gone on, been speaking all over the country and different parts of the world. In fact, I've spoken on 6 different continents. Nobody's asked me to come speak to Antarctica yet, on more than 80 college and university campuses. These are all the things that God has accomplished over these many years that we've been plowing away. Singles and doubles, singles and doubles. First one there at the event, last one to leave, just showing up every day. That's the way it's worked out for us.
Hey Greg, it's Meg. I need you to call me. It's an emergency about Melinda.
I was sitting in a Jersey Mike's, eating a sub sandwich in Thousand Oaks, California, December 2nd, 2017. And I got a call from Meg Crowley. The message just said, Melinda has had an accident. I need your help right away. Please call me.
On December 2nd, 2017, I received a call. Melinda had an accident. I'm sorry.
Within about 10 minutes, I was on the freeway, driving to UCLA Medical Center, talking to the surgeon who was telling me that because of this accident Melinda had, falling off a ladder, hitting a concrete slab with her head, that unless she had emergency surgery immediately, she wasn't going to make it through the night. Does she want the surgery? Now, I had her advance directive. I had the original. She had entrusted it to me. I knew what she wanted under these circumstances. I have absolute confidence that I will be with God in heaven upon my death and anticipate that time joyfully. Therefore, my life should not be artificially prolonged. However, neither is my life to be artificially shortened based on a functional or instrumental view of life. The answer is yes to the surgery.
I was standing in my house in the keeping room or living room, and the phone rang, and it was Melinda's neighbor. And she told me what had happened and that Melinda was on the way to UCLA Trauma Center.
It was a tough moment. So I stepped into her room, which is just in neuro ICU. It's just a one-patient room. And my world changed in that moment. She was so still. And my sister is just so alive and animated and has such a fierce intelligence, and her mind is always working. And in that bit, she was so still.
That day, December 2nd, 2017, changed Stand to Reason, changed Melinda's life, changed each one of us. Because the person who held Stand to Reason together, it was gone. Because she had most of it inside of her. She had it in her mind.
It's been almost a year since that accident, and just a couple of weeks ago, I had the first conversation with Melinda that I had had since the accident. She was looking at me, she was taking in what I was saying, she was smiling. I saw her lips moving, and so I leaned closely over to her and put my ear next to her lips, and I heard her say, "I knew you'd come."
Melinda was big on thanking the volunteers. She was very appreciative of the work we did. Here, we're just being us. We're just being us here. That's just who we were. I miss her. You know, she was one of my best friends and my closest sister in Christ. So when I see us laughing like that, I have good memories.
I knew if there's anybody that values her as much as I do, it is the STR family. I also knew with Greg's wisdom that if I needed any kind of help with decision making, that I could for sure trust in his guidance and his reasoning.
It's over 5 years now. She's still in bed, marginally lucid, still giving glory to God. Her life, still a testimony to the intrinsic value of human dignity and life, and to the sovereign working of God. But it also reflects her incredible commitment, costly commitment, to a consistent Christian worldview. Oh yeah, that's too sweet. So
But it doesn't feel like
this isn't going to taste like clay, is it?
Yeah,
no worries.
My dad, we were talking to my dad about it, and he said, yeah, he remembers a lot of Stand to Reason things back
Yeah,
in the
way
day,
back.
I think.
The last century.
Yeah.
I think if Melinda had a clear picture in her mind of where Stand to Reason is today, the realities, 6 of them around the country, the expansion, the impact, I think she would feel like I feel, like unbelievable. It's unbelievable what God has accomplished.
In 1998, my wife and I got married in January, and after we came back from our honeymoon in February, we said, man, this is the organization we need to support. So I remember getting the phone and calling up the Stand to Reason office, and nobody answered. There was just an answering machine. So I just left a message saying, hey, my name is Alan. We loved what we heard from Greg. We want to support you guys financially. Give us a call. And that's all I said. So I just hung up. And then later that day, we get a call. I pick it up, and it's Greg Koukl on the phone. And Greg says to me, hey, I heard your message. I'm so glad you're excited about Stand to Reason. And he said, I'll be happy to take your money. That's the first thing he said. It wasn't probably just a week or so after that we ended up sitting in the Stand to Reason office with a bunch of the staff that were there, kind of introduced us as volunteers, and that's sort of the beginning of how we began volunteering for STR. Eventually, what he started to do is offer to provide mentorship for a small group of people, and he would just disciple us.
I don't want to lean too heavily on his gifts. Yes, he's a very clear thinker, but one thing he's also been able to do is to figure out what it is that he's doing and explain it to others so that they can also learn to do those things. Now, they might not have the exact giftings Greg has, but at least he can see what it is he's doing, and he's been able to teach others to do that also.
The Christian worldview, with God making human beings special, God being the standard of morality for the universe, which explains why there could be a problem of evil in the first place. All of these things fit in our worldview really well. So this is what I mean by it's the best explanation for the way things are.
So he's been able to spread this ability to think well and this ability to have conversations to people who might not ever have thought to do that.
Watching Greg, and he just has a way of getting to the heart of most issues. And so that's been great. But it's not just kind of what I think. Greg has impacted how I behave. We started Red Pen Logic when the pandemic hit. And, you know, when we started out, got a little snarky. We were putting letter grades on there, and there was a bit of attitude. And I mean, you ask the people closest to me, they will say, you know, Tim's love language is sarcasm. Now, people need to know, Greg knows how to be sarcastic, okay? Greg knows how to do it, but it's important when we're communicating to the public that we don't let that stuff get in the way.
Here's what's really important. John knew what he was doubting and what he wasn't doubting. He's not doubting the authority of Scripture. He's still counting on Scripture. He's not even doubting that there will be a Messiah. Are you the Messiah, or do we look for someone else? Take heart. If John the Baptist, a prophet of God, can doubt to Jesus, then so can you.
So Greg has kind of modeled for me how to be this kind of humble apologist who goes after the issues, goes after the ideas, but we don't go after individuals, okay? We leave that aside.
I think the way Greg has shaped me more than anything was to think through the process of how I actually do apologetics.
Ironically, the further we get away from the biblical events, the more confidence we can have.
One of the things Greg did is kind of bring me behind the curtain and say, okay, I answered this objection. Here's what I was thinking. Here's what I think I did well. Looking back, here's maybe what I would have done differently. Here's what's true, but here's also what's rhetorically effective. And so I think Greg's gifting and his commitment to is just thinking through things step by step and taking others along for the journey.
The prime way that Greg influenced me is just the way that he says it. Rather than being taught a lot of things, I simply caught by listening to the kinds of conversations that he had on the radio show. We like to say we had a one-way relationship with Greg for a really long time.
I think the biggest thing I've learned from Greg, I think I've learned that apologetics isn't some separate thing over here, but very much a useful thing that you then make part of your DNA, because Stand to Reason is such an equipping organization and very much embodies that. Everything that the Stand to Reason team does is done for the sake of someone else to better be able to persuasively defend their faith.
For years, I've ended a radio show with a phrase, and those who listen know what it is. It's "Give 'em heaven." I actually got that from a pastor of mine. But I realize now that this has really come to represent what Stand to Reason is all about.
Well, Greg, my final words to you, what I'd like to say is just appreciate the relationship that we have had, especially those first 6 years. I'll never forget those 6 years with you. I'm so, I like to use the word blessed. I've been so encouraged by your ministry and how you've been discipling me in so many ways in my own life.
I really love you, Greg. You're a good man. I've learned a lot from you, and I cherish our friendship.
Greg, I think you have no idea the number of people you have put in the field who are doing phenomenal kingdom work. There is no way I would be where I am today without your influence, your mentoring, your ability to help me adjust around the edges. That kind of mentorship has meant the world to me. And watching you be a gracious and yet very persuasive defender of the faith has rounded off my rough edges and made me more of an ambassador, more of a statesman for the pro-life view than I would have ever been had you not intersected my life. So I am profoundly grateful.
Greg, you have been such an incredible encourager to me and mentor to me over the last several years. There have been so many times where we've had conversations where you have uplifted me and encouraged me to think that this ministry work is something that I should be doing.
Your mentorship, taking me under your wing, believing in a young guy who lacked a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom. You have left an indelible mark on my life, and it has served me well as I serve God's kingdom. And so your investment in me has been a kingdom investment. And I thank God for your impact in my life, Greg.
You are one of the people that has shaped my thinking as much or more than anybody. I don't know if I've personally thanked you for that. Starting back in the mentoring group, the podcast I still listen to regularly, I consider you a friend. So love you, brother. Thankful for you. And just can't wait and look forward to many more years in ministry together.
Greg, I cannot express how grateful I am that I get to sit with you in a little sound booth for 2 hours every week and just be mentored by you. I get to hear you give these wonderful answers to these questions that people send in. And I'm taking all of that in and I'm filing that away. And you're making me a better apologist. You are helping me to learn how to respond to people, how to think clearly, how to care about people, how to serve God faithfully every single week. I see how faithful you've been over the years, and I just want to say thank you.
Boss man, what can I say about you? You are a mentor to me. You are a spiritual father to me, and you are my friend. I know how much you care for me, and I care about you, and I love you, and I know I wouldn't be in this position without you, and I just pray that I, as an apologist, make you proud.
I want to train others. Stand to Reason will be there to train others to stand up and do the same thing, doing what we can to help people move a little bit further ahead. It's my desire to raise up a whole army of clear-thinking Christians.
When I think about the launch, May 1st, 1993, and I think about May 1st, 2023, 30 years later, there was no way I could have ever imagined what God would do in 30 years.
30 years is great. I pray it has another 30. Why don't we say another 100? Why don't we just get more speakers, more writers, more people on the STR team to take this several generations ahead? I pray it does.
The most important generation is always the next generation. The most important generation is always the next generation, and that's you.
We have an audience of one. We do our job before Him, and the rest is up to Him. For me, I've been along for the ride. I'm so thankful God has included me in this project.